Hi there. Welcome to the webinar. This is Bethany Servin, and I work in marketing here at UsableNet. This webinar is produced by UsableNet, a recognized leader in accessibility and digital inclusion. Our first speaker, Jason Taylor, is our Chief Innovation Officer, and he'll share a bit more about us. And now I'm going to go ahead and I'll hand it off to you, Jason.
Thank you, Bethany, and thanks everybody for signing up and giving us an hour of their time. I was really pleased to see that we've got over 200 registrants for the webinar today, which gives me great hope that people are looking to increase the advocacy at the highest levels of their company. And with context, we're most likely moving into tighter economic times. The advocacy of accessibility with senior leadership is essential to create a sustainable accessibility program, and also understanding how to engage teams across the organization to see accessibility as sort of an ally to their goals. I think is also part of that whole overall process of creating a sustainable and achievable program. To that end, we've brought in an expert in Charlie Triplett, who has lots of battle stories, but worked at the highest levels. And Charlie's actually done a couple of presentations with us before, and brought his knowledge on a couple of subjects. He's going to reference some of those, and we'll make sure that you get links to those if you want to follow up. Charlie also mentioned probably a book, but he doesn't mention it very often, but he has a book available which is free, which has got an amazing amount of information in it, and Bethany will make sure you guys get a link to that as well. I'm going to hand over to Charlie. He's got a great presentation today. Going to try to keep it to 45 minutes, so we've got 15 minutes for Q&A. Charlie, I know you want to maybe introduce yourself a little bit first, and then move into the content. But thank you so much for your time today, Charlie.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to hang out with everybody and hopefully share some things that are helpful. Today, we are going to talk about leadership buy-in and what to do with it. This is adapted from the book on accessibility.com, and my name is Charlie Triplett. Just so that I'm not some disembodied voice talking on the other end of a Zoom call, I am kind of another boring white guy in tech with salt and pepper hair and a beard. Today I'm in my home office, but I do get up to some stuff. I enjoy hiking in very, very, very remote places. This is me on a 3-week trek in the Himalayas. That was a long, uncomfortable trip that was worth every step. I do go chasing waterfalls. This is descending 100-foot Franklin Falls in Washington State. This is most of what I do over the summer is canyoning. And I enjoy traveling with my little friend Truman the Tiger, mascot of the University of Missouri. This little Truman plushie has been all kinds of places stuffed in my carry-on bag. So big MIZ to anyone on the call who went to Mizzou. That's where I graduated with a bachelor's of fine arts in graphic design. I really didn't learn to start software engineering and code until well after college. So my experience in product development and engineering and design really spans a really weird and wide gamut. Allows me to talk to just about everybody. And one way to illustrate that is this chart, kind of describing the declining level at which I'm building stuff and more focus on accessibility. I don't come from a program management background. I've been focused on design and engineering for most of my career, gradually shifting my focus to accessibility and engineering and design. And I recently put my thoughts about accessibility into book form, which has really just kind of maximized that focus on accessibility. But I've been working at very large institutions like the University of Missouri, very established but startup-like atmospheres like Veterans United Home Loans, big corporate America like T-Mobile, So I have these wonderful experiences where I think each place and each group of people that I've worked with have taught me and given me huge opportunities that I'm so very thankful for. So what are we going to cover today? You know, there are different types of authority within an organization. Generally speaking, people talk about 8 types, you know, things like coercive authority and rewarding authority. There's relational authority. There's the expert authority that we often carry as the accessibility experts within our orgs. What we're going to talk about today is really planning how to leverage a specific type of authority, that legitimate line authority, the people at the top at every level from you know, of the pyramid of corporate infrastructure. Because without legitimate authority backing your efforts, you will always be frustrated and running into roadblocks and seeing any progress that you've made be instantaneously erased with each change of leadership. And to gain that, we have some work to do. We have to do these 4 things. We have to align key groups. We have to know how to prepare and what to present. We have to know what to request. Okay, and we have to avoid some pitfalls. So just be forewarned, this talk will include Venn diagrams. It will include my anecdotal evidence. Okay, some of these things are bog standard strategic communication strategies, but some of them are just, hey, this is what I've seen. So your mileage may vary. Feel free to take what I say and hack it into what works for your enterprise. And there will be some outdated movie references, so my apologies in advance. So starting with aligning key groups, okay, this is a really fantastic place to start. It's important that we don't go it alone, that we find allies and make friends. So all of these groups are helpful. Okay, this group on the left is often easy because they see the same problems or have the same interests as you do. So diversity, equity, and inclusion, yeah, that's a natural ally. Your legal counsel, that's a natural ally. Your search engine optimization team, though, your SEO team, if you have one of those, you might not realize it at first, but that is an incredibly powerful ally. And we'll get into why that is, as well as your performance and conversion analysts can be huge allies in your accessibility journey. Now, it's also important that you talk to these groups because it's important they are aware of what you're doing so they're not caught off guard. Especially if you don't have an official mandate, you're kind of in grassroots mode kind of effort, they can easily see you as a threat, especially this group on the left. So if you receive a budget to hire vendors and staffing, and you're now an official thing, you are potentially a target, and you want to be careful in the way you relate to these groups, because I have seen attempted takeovers of an accessibility program because it was seen as funded and powerful and a vehicle to advancement. Now, this group on the right can often be more challenging to align. And it's simply because they have their own goals, they have their own efforts, and they often have their own ways of working that they're not super interested in changing. So your marketing team or your design managers, your UI engineering managers can be a challenge. QA testing, these can be more challenging at first, and they often need some, what I would call a charismatic thought leadership to get on board. They need to see that this is an idea they can adopt and advance themselves sometimes, rather than just like jumping on board very quickly. So how do you align these groups? Well, I'll be honest, I overuse Venn diagrams a lot because I think they work. On screen right now is the greatest Venn diagram ever made, and I'll give you a second to absorb this. On the left, we have a beaver with an electric guitar. And on the right, there's a duck with an electronic keyboard. And if you combine them, what you have is a platypus with an electronic guitar keyboard. And I will pay anything to see this come to life before my eyes. So if there's anybody from Chuck E. Cheese here, please let's collaborate and get this, let's make this happen. But you can do this all day, okay? Venn diagrams are a great way to express this. And showing that your interests are aligned is kind of this easy. I mean, you do need to be able to back this up with specific language. But this is a good starting point. I do this all the time. I will have this Venn diagram of like 2 or 3 groups of things some group wants, some other group wants this, and people with disabilities or the accessibility team, we all want this, and all people want this. And the important thing here is that this Venn diagram is practically a circle. So let's talk about some of these. Here's another Venn diagram that is practically a circle. Your DE&I group. Now, obviously, this should be an easy group to ally with. They advocate for inclusion already, but they may be missing out on accessibility. It's not uncommon. Your DE&I communicators are always looking for something to write about, okay? So they're groups that love to produce newsletters, and they love to write about some new effort or initiative within the company. These are folks who want to be able to talk about the great things their company is doing when they go out to speak at conferences and be those kinds of folks. So what are their goals? Like, what are the things they're working on? For instance, maybe they have a hiring target initiative for inclusion. And, is the career portal accessible? Are they putting up any barriers that they're not thinking about? And how can you help them get where they want to go? Likewise, your legal counsel is a natural ally because they can be your absolute best friend and have an incredible power to charmingly intimidate stalwart teams. I have often used legal counsel to come in and just add that extra little bit of heft to what we were asking someone to do. But you have to make sure they're on board with not trying to be the police. Okay, there is a finesse to that, and a certain charm that you want your legal counsel to have about it. Because as soon as you're seen as the police, if your accessibility team is seen as the police, people will start avoiding you. So again, legal counsel, natural ally, but you want to use them as sparingly as possible. Let's talk about that SEO and that performance team. Especially with search engine optimization, you are both seeking the same thing technologically, okay? On the web, especially what we're talking about is meaningfully structured applications and content when it comes to the code. And the great thing is that's what Google wants your site to contain. It's looking for structured content like headings and page titles. It wants your site to be as structured and easy to understand for a robot as possible. And that is exactly what screen readers need to consume your web content. So your SEO team, natural ally. Search engine optimization is all about structured content, as is web accessibility. And your site performance analysts are great allies as well, because these are people who are thinking about site speed. Often see the direct correlation between accessibility and better, faster, more secure code. That's often a very, very easy sell with those folks. Okay, so let's talk about how to prepare and present. I honestly think there's a lot of content about what to present, but the how is just as important. So these are things that I'm pretty sure should go without saying, or at least it should. But I have seen folks not always manage these concerns. And there have been times when I have missed the mark on these concerns. Like finding out, number one, finding out what your audience wants in terms of presentation materials. Okay, so when you're approaching leadership at any level, ask your allies, because there are leaders at the senior level and beyond who want a super info dense PowerPoint that they can review later. Like that's kind of how they like to absorb information. There are people who think that PowerPoints are a waste of time and they just want a single sheet of paper to refer to beforehand. Dial that in, find out what kind of presentation folks want before you get into and start making that glorious PowerPoint. Point 2 is we want to respect their time. That means getting to the point and making your discussion about people. You really want to skip past the methodology of why you know what you're talking about. Like if you're in front of leadership and you are in the process of introducing accessibility and asking for funding and that sort of thing, and you're bringing up WCAG criteria numbers, you're probably doing it wrong. You really need to assume that you've made it to the room and they believe you, and just be able to back up anything you say with facts, be able to get to the point. And that's where doing your research beforehand really comes in, not just on what they expect in terms of presentation materials, but also in terms of budget and planning cycles, and understanding what these leaders control. I have messed this up before, okay? I have completely misinterpreted what a leader was asking for in terms of an accessibility intro and presentation, and gave the wrong talk to the wrong people. And you feel about an inch tall when you do something like that. You realize that you just wasted nearly an hour of many people who are in a much higher pay grade than you are. So doing your research, respecting their time, and getting that dialed in beforehand is really important. And lastly, on this slide, I want to talk about managing decorum and emotions. So you want to be appropriate to the context of decorum and help manage everyone's emotions. I have seen folks get very hand-wringing, emotional, or pleading a case, or just downright accusingly angry in these situations. And once you get angry with someone at work, or get, I don't know, just testy, you start to lose credibility, and it's really hard to regain that. So it's important to be cool and manage your own emotions, but also manage emotions for leadership as well. So we're not trying to make anyone out to be bad people. If your enterprise has huge accessibility issues, it's not about the mistakes that they've made. I generally frame that in terms of, all enterprises are going through this right now in light of new case law. There isn't necessarily anything unique to our issues. This is something that is extant throughout XYZ industry, and we can be the leaders in making it right. Presented that as an opportunity, not an accusation. And when we're talking about decorum, we're also talking about how we represent ourselves. I have seen folks be way too casual in how they represent themselves, or have a super weird, nerdy Zoom background, very niche things in their home office. This is the time to put away the Star Trek figurine collection in the background of your office, or the sword collection or something like that. This shirt, the Alley Cat shirts, the A11Y cats, and it has the 9 cats on it, with each one has a disability. This is a good shirt. I love this shirt. It's a good joke. I own this shirt, but this is not the time to wear that shirt. You really don't want to look like a special interest or protest group. This is about being relatable to everyone in that room, and making it clear that accessibility matters to everyone, to all of your customers, and to everybody that works there. Because the enterprise can only take accessibility as seriously as it sees you. That took me a little while. I only recently wrote that down, and I realized that is basically it. If your enterprise isn't taking accessibility seriously, it may be because they don't take the accessibility team seriously. So you want to dress like this, like they dress. Be observant and specific. So if your leadership dresses in tech casual at whatever level you're meeting with, they're wearing jeans and a hoodie, do likewise. If they wear shirts and ties, I'm sorry, but it's time to pull the hard pants from the back of the closet. All right, so let's talk about what to present. We covered the how, but what do we present? I don't think it's all about money. It's not all about the Benjamins. I really think it's important to not start with profits or money or legal risk. I think something more powerful is really starting with your company values. Every company has a set of values it claims to uphold, okay? For example, even if people only talk about values once a year at their annual review, at T-Mobile, one of our core values is we love our customers, okay? And there is no exclusion possible in that statement. We don't say, we love our customers except for them. You will be surprised at how many people will respond positively to this, okay? Nobody in any room is going to argue against upholding the company values. And it kind of gives you a high ground for the rest of your discussions. Even if your company, they're very slogany or whatever it is, your values are a great place to start this discussion. And oftentimes these values mean a lot to leadership, even if, for those of us down at the individual contributor level, we don't necessarily think about them a lot because it's our day-to-day drudgery. Leaders often look at these values as kind of guiding principles about how to run the org. You're also going to present, if possible, some sort of summary of assessment results, but tell a story about what those assessment results mean to people, to your customers, to your employees, and how that conflicts with those company values. Okay, and set a target for where you need to be. Don't just say, hey, there's a problem and this conflicts with our values, but here's where we can be. And this is super important, okay? We have to demonstrate how fixing this aligns with these leaders' goals. These are people, they have goals that are probably at the highest levels of your enterprise that are tied to their bonuses. And this cannot look like it's going to get in the way of their next vacation home on the beach. They have very specific goals and aims and desires. Their stated goals may be very general. They may be very specific. If your leadership has specific language around goals, let's use that, even if they're very slogany. So some examples that I've been using would be innovation. Okay, everybody's throwing around this word innovation, and that's okay. It's okay to use it because everybody wants to find innovation in corporate America right now. If you're looking for some great examples of accessibility leading to greater use cases and great inventions, a great book is called Mismatch, and that details many inventions that are derived from inclusive design. You can talk about market opportunity. We can talk, this is a great space to talk about, how over 1/4 of Americans have a disability. I don't know what that looks like in Canada or other countries, but I suspect it's kind of similar. You can talk about people preferring to work with inclusive companies and point out how Apple leverages this for their brand image. You can talk about aging populations with growing disabilities as our population grows older. And this is probably the point also to talk about reduced legal risk. Why don't we go here first? Why wasn't this the first thing that we hit them over the head with? And I think it's this. What I've observed is in the back of anyone's head, when you introduce the idea of legal risk, this little thought comes up. And it's this little insidious thought that says, well, maybe we won't get a complaint. Lots of companies don't. Maybe we'll get lucky. And unless you've already been hit with a serious and expensive complaint, it's real hard to lean on this. It's harder than you might think. And it's not the sort of argument that necessarily gets the results that you want. And I also include brand image in this because some legitimate complaints have made it into the news cycle, and that's helpful to illustrate those, like Target or Piggly Wiggly or Beyonce. It's not a good look. So you will need to clearly articulate how you're going to solve this problem and where you're going to need help from them. So there will be some element of discussing strategic goals and policy and tactics that need the backing of leadership. You might not do a deep dive into each of these, and there's certainly not time to do a deep dive into each of these in this talk. Each one could be its own talk. I think the last talk that I gave for UsableNet was about setting measurable policy targets, not even all the policies that you need, but how do you create a measurable policy target? And notice I use the word policy target because it's so easy to just say, well, we have a policy that everything has to meet WCAG 2.2 now. Okay, well, how do you measure that? How are you actually going to measure that? So you have to break your policies down into smaller measurable chunks of best practices and compliance and commitments. And you may not get too deep into tactics in this conversation with leadership, and that's okay. Like if you're planning on generating content for them or asking leadership to give keynotes for accessibility events, these are all things you may ask them about. And we'll talk more about exactly what we're going to ask them for. But essentially, strategic goals, policy targets, and tactics, these are all things that are going to get brought up. And if you have questions about maybe what some of those things are, I'm happy to discuss that. That's a great Q&A for later. Okay, we should move on from this slide. There's so many directions we could go with this. But setting that big picture direction for your enterprise, setting out what the targets are, And a little bit of how you're going to accomplish that is going to be super helpful for this discussion. Okay, so you've delivered a great presentation and they're smiling, they're nodding even. They like what you said because you're helping them get, them to their goals and their next lake home from their bonus. But now they have some questions. And if it's about your own data, it's about they want to drill into what the issues are from that assessment report that we hope you have. That's easy. That's great. Drill in, show them anything you want to know. Show them your stuff now. But then there are these kinds of questions I have seen leaders ask. And anytime you come across an ambiguous question like one of these, it's important to try to find the question behind the question. Okay, so this first question up here is, why not make a separate but equal accessibility experience? Ooh, as an expert, that kind of kills you inside. But it's a question people ask. What they're really asking, though, is well, won't this hinder or slow down our processes? Why can't this be a separate process? Because things are already slow around here, and this feels like something that's going to make it even worse. Another question is, why can't we just use one of those overlays? They sound great. The real question behind the question there is, I've done some Googling on this, and I don't see why this can't just go away and be someone else's problem. Why can't we just outsource this to one of these third-party vendors? They install their code and just make it work. And another question I have seen is this: show me the money. How does this help us make more profits? Oof. What they're really asking is, I don't see where the opportunity is here. Where is the opportunity? I don't see it. So here are the ways that I've approached these types of questions, and your mileage may vary, but these have been very successful for me. The separate experiences question. And the simple truth is that we've been there before. We've made separate websites before. Let's talk about when the iPhone was first released, 2007. Many websites created separate mobile versions of their site. So you would go to a website and it would be like, oh, do you want to go to our mobile version? And you'd click yes when you're on your iPhone, because otherwise the screen was very, very compressed and tiny, and you were looking at a whole web page on your tiny little iPhone 3. And that was costly because we were maintaining two whole websites. I did this. This happened while I was at the University of Missouri, and we had a mobile version of our website. Not only was this expensive to build and maintain, but it meant that the two versions didn't learn from each other. Now, later, around 2010, when we started to design mobile first, when that became the extant strategy for design, we learned that the same affordances that worked well for mobile devices, things like bigger buttons and larger text and higher contrast, less complex operations, that these all made sense for desktop as well. What we learned was that making things work on a very small screen had huge ramifications for the way people interacted with our devices on desktop and larger screens. And honestly, that was the last time any real UI innovation happened, I think, in the industry. Show me when there was a bigger change. I would like to see it. I believe that accessibility first design is waiting to be the next innovation. And it's waiting there in your enterprise's space for someone to pick it up and move that forward and be an innovator in the space. What about overlays? I have had folks ask about that, and it's very easy to explain that, they don't work as promised. Depending on who that person is, whether they are, at what level or technical understanding, you may need to dive into that a little bit deeper. But the other thing is, they generally don't seem to dissuade people from bringing an ADA complaint. Complaints of the Americans with Disabilities Act increase every year, and they spiked rapidly during the COVID pandemic, when digital services were the only way many people with disabilities could access goods and services. Well, plenty of arguments against overlays. Overlay fact sheet is a great source of content for that. But generally speaking, what you're trying to say is that this is not actually going to solve the problem in a complete way. And for the show me the money person, they're out there. And we shouldn't require a profit motive to do the right thing. Like, this is the thing, this is the part that I'm not going to say to that person, is that, look, we shouldn't need money to do the right thing. And honestly, if that's how your company really operates, if you run into that at every level, it might be time to look for another job. But it's pretty easy to just discuss sheer numbers. People with disabilities are the largest minority of people in the United States. You can also talk about risk avoidance. You can look for cases that were brought against competitors or peers, and what were those settlements like? You know, it's not necessarily just show me the money, it's also show me the money that we save by not having to go through these complaints. But for any of those questions, what you're really trying to talk about is that accessibility is about everybody. That this is another opportunity to show them that everyone will experience at least temporary or situational disabilities. And you can tailor this to your enterprise. You can tailor this to your audience, okay? But I generally explain that the way we think about disabilities of, you know, being permanently having to be someone who uses a wheelchair, or permanently blind or low vision, permanently deaf or hard of hearing. That's how we tend to think about disabilities, but we will all experience temporary and situational disabilities. Several years back, you know, I had knee surgery and I suddenly had a motor disability because I was unable to climb or walk stairs very easily. I had to be on crutches. And day one, I discovered that my house, with its, you know, 2 steps on the front porch, was a huge obstacle for me. I have been in situations where I've taken some medications that made me feel sleepy or groggy, but I still had technical things I needed to do. An easy one that I go to often that kind of generates a certain amount of sympathy is I will ask, so, you know, for the person who wants to create a special version of our website, I would say, you know, do we want a parent holding a sleeping child and they're trying to be quiet, but they want to consume our videos? Do we want to ask them to go to a special version of our website? Or should the video captions just be enabled? In fact, enabling captions by default increases consumption on mobile devices. That's why TikTok and Facebook do it by default. So there's some great ways you can dive into those and make a really compelling story out of it. Not just a, you're wrong, this is right, but like, hey, let me tell you a story about this. Let's talk about what to request. Okay, so we do need to have a plan for what we're actually going to ask for from leadership. We can't just be there for show and tell. You have to make some immediate and short-term asks and some long-term asks. So earlier we talked about natural allies and allies across other departments that we need help with. If there are holdouts, that needs a quick remedy, and leadership can help you do that. I have seen in my career whole groups who were holding out and did not want to do a particular thing or did not want to get on board with what I was pitching, until a leadership said, yeah, I think I like this. And suddenly everyone in the room who had previously said, no, I don't want this, was like, yes, yeah, we think this is great. We want this. Yeah, let's do it. It can be that easy. You're going to need them to visibly endorse what's happening, okay, with the accessibility program that you're trying to build. So you've talked to them about your strategic plan, your policies, the commitments that you want departments to make. And they need to visibly endorse this very quickly and very early and often. But we'll get to more long-term asks here in a second. And you're probably going to discuss funding. What's it going to cost? What kind of team do you need? If you're in the space where you are first introducing accessibility and you're trying to build your program, having those funding requests ready is going to be crucial. And again, this is where doing that research, understanding business cycles and how funding works is so crucial. You need to be able to explain this in terms of how they think about budget timeframes. So if your company plans budgets a year out, and you come in the middle of the year and are asking for $500,000 worth of funding in the middle of a budget cycle, that's probably not going to happen unless you are going through a severe complaint at the moment that has become an emergency. So you're really going to them and talking about next year. That comes down to doing that research. When we talk about long-term asks, okay, as your program gets going, as you have more data, you're going to be asking them to review those accessibility targets, those policy targets on a regular cadence. And notice I use the word cadence, not basis. Basis is a squishy word. When we say, oh, we're going to do that on a regular basis, that could mean once a year or once every 6 months. But whatever their meeting cadence is for other targets in the business, match to that. So if they have a weekly look at sales targets and profits and expenses, your accessibility policy targets need to be in that deck too. And if it's not elevated to that enterprise level for them, it will just get relegated. You're going to need to ask them long-term to help you enforce accessibility policy targets. So it's probably not going to come to like senior leadership to, enforce some sort of technical gate, but it is up to them to pass down the information that it's not negotiable. And you're going to be asking them to visibly support your accessibility team in their communications. Okay. So at, team town halls or all hands meetings or whatever, where everybody's really brought together, you're going to ask them to bring up accessibility, show them that it matters to them. You're going to deliver the content for them, though. You're going to write a lot of content for leaders to put in their slide decks, in their emails, in their mouths, because you don't want to walk into this room with these long-term asks and present a problem at their feet. You want to give them a solution. So yeah, I'm going to ask you to speak about accessibility, but I'm going to give you your speaking notes. I'm going to give you your slide. I'm going to ask you to put this in your newsletter, but I'm going to write the content for it. Helping them understand that, like, yeah, I am delivering this to you goes a long way in making that happen. Okay, so that was what to ask. Let's talk about some pitfalls. These are all lessons that I have lived. I think some of them I've managed to learn. But I think the biggest pitfall of all is believing that you're only going to do this once. This freeze frame is from a movie called Groundhog Day, in which Bill Murray's character keeps waking up and repeating the same day. It's apparently for years. He's locked into living Groundhog Day over and over and over again. And to be honest, that's what this is going to be like. That's what accessibility is like when you're running a program, because VPs, CEOs, directors, senior managers come and go. When you're talking to leadership at any level, each one has their own special pet project. They all have their special goal and strategy for achieving that goal. And you'll find yourself aligning to many VPs in your time, making many variations of your pitch, doing this research over and over and over again. That's been my reality. So in 4 years, we've been through 3 chief digital officers, 4+ VPs, 4+ directors of UX. You will be giving this presentation a lot and reformulating it a lot. Look, this freeze frame is from a Netflix series called Russian Doll. It's a much darker version of Groundhog Day, but I chose it because, someone once told me that this is what it means to work in this space of accessibility. You have to be prepared to talk about accessibility and say the same things over and over and over again until you retire. And if you treat leadership like a buy-in, like a one and done, you will see your relevance and program erode with every passing senior leader. And that is kind of a dark fate. That is a dark way to look at it, but that is a huge pitfall that's very easy to fall into. All right, so don't ask for things leadership can't deliver. This is pitfall number 2. They're not the genie from Aladdin. Sweeping changes to processes or technology are things that are just not going to be something that they're going to be able to make happen. Out of cycle business requests, okay? Again, if you're asking for money in the middle of a business cycle, you know, and there's not an emergency or some pressing serious legal complaint, that's going to be something that leadership just can't do. Even genies have limits. Also, don't ask for things they can't deliver just in terms of making ambiguous requests. So I have seen folks ask a chief digital officer to make everyone start doing accessibility. And not only is that impossible, but what does that even mean? Like make them like a schoolyard bully? You really have to have those requests dialed in of what you're going to ask them to review and look at and help you enforce. So don't ask for things that leadership can't deliver. And it's real easy to walk out of any meeting where you've talked to someone about accessibility and feel like you won because you were heard. But you didn't win. You just started a conversation. You can't let those next steps feel ambiguous. Those long-term requests, short-term requests, they can't feel ambiguous. They need to have timeframes. They need to be solutions to problems with the next step to solving it, a plan to follow up, what's going to happen next. Don't let next steps feel ambiguous. You really want to be concise. You want to be clear about what you want and when, because your goal here was not just to get buy-in on the idea of accessibility. You're trying to get buy-in on a viable change management strategy. And that can't be ambiguous. And lastly, don't make promises you can't keep. You will not control everything within the enterprise. No matter how much clout or leverage you're given. You want to be careful about what you promise. So never tell leadership, we'll never experience a complaint if we implement this program. That may not be true, especially if you've already had a complaint. Don't tell people that we'll achieve perfect compliance, because you won't. That's not really possible. There will always be some low level or medium severity issues. And where possible, try to avoid giving precise timeframes. If you say, oh, well, this will take exactly, 18 months, that's a dangerous place to be. Avoid giving precise dates as much as you can, because you don't control everything and you never will. I'll leave you with my favorite Venn diagram. A successful accessibility program is about showing how these changes align with everyone's goals. So my real life goal is a Chuck E. Cheese experience where a beaver with a guitar and a duck with a keyboard and a platypus with a guitar keyboard can be my reality. So again, if there's anybody from Chuck E. Cheese or somebody from Chuck E. Cheese, I'd really like to make this happen. And with that, I will say thank you and turn it back over to Jason.
Thank you, Charlie. That was amazing. I really appreciate the content and great timing as well, because I know Bethany's probably keeping an eye on questions. Bethany, could you look in those questions and maybe sort of filter for which ones you think are the best ones for Charlie to address on this call?
Yeah.
And also a quick note on that before Bethany is, if you do ask a question and we don't get time, Charlie and I will make sure that we do answer it. We know who asked the question, so we can make sure you get a response to it. So don't feel like, hey, we're running out of time. I had a question, but there's no point. We will make sure you get an answer.
Charlie, in a big organization, where do I start to actually build all of this?
Oh, that's a fun question. The designer in me, loves ambiguity, but not everybody loves that. I really think the best place to start, like if you're starting from scratch, if I had to put pen to paper in one particular place, I would start with the company values. I would start with the company values because that is such a great starting point to any discussion. And nobody is going to, not in a real way. I mean, people can be cynical, right? Like, I get it. Every company has these values and they talk about how these values are the bedrock of why our company is so successful and we serve our customer, blah, 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 blah. I know. But no one will argue with that in a public way, especially in front of other leadership. There's such a powerful tool to have in your back pocket and include in your talks and presentations. And being able to articulate that, it helps you. The other thing about like bringing that into your values is you're getting away from that technical requirement too. Like it's helping you discuss accessibility and in kind of ambiguous terms and answer it in ambiguous ways. Like, what does it mean to, you know, serve our customers in the best possible way every day? Okay, well, let's talk about what that means. And that's where you really get into storytelling. I think storytelling is so powerful, and values are a great gateway to going into that story. That was 1,000 words to say. Yeah, I'd start with values. Let's start writing values.
How do you manage the audience when there are people who do not know what accessibility is and people who are fully in and experts on accessibility, and they're both on the same executive team?
Oh, that's a great place to be. So if you already have I want to leverage that person. Like, let's bring them in to talk about, you know, accessibility. If they're not interested in that, I mean, I have whole slide decks that are like, hey, let's talk about what disability means. Let's talk about the, you know, the generally speaking 4 broad categories of accessibility if we're talking about the digital space. You may need to do an intro because at least once a year, I would say, I definitely come across folks who ask this question, like, well, what do you mean people who are blind or low vision use the internet? How is that even possible, right? It never even occurs to them that people with disabilities access the internet. They just, it's not part of their daily experience. They don't think about it. And so being able to give that base level, like eye-opening talk is very valuable. And that is another slide deck that, you know, you're going to keep around. You're going to keep those slides. You're going to swap those slides in and out depending on who you're talking to. Not going to be a one and done. You're going to be given that presentation for the rest of your career. So I hope that answers the question. I really think it just comes down to not forgetting that there are folks who don't know the basics. You know, during my time at T-Mobile, every big presentation that I gave, I would always start with basics, like 100% of the time, because we get kind of insulated, I think, in our accessibility world. And it's very easy for us to think that, like, well, we've been doing this for like X number of years at this company, and I think everybody knows what accessibility is. No, they don't. No, they don't. They might have latched onto your presentation for like a few months that you gave last year, but they have forgotten it, and they will need to hear it again. There are a lot of accessibility people who are tired of hearing about accessibility. I should say it this way. There are more accessibility people who are tired of giving that talk on accessibility basics than there are employees who are tired of hearing it. So never give up on giving that talk of that basic intro to, like, this is how, this is a screen reader, this is a keyboard, this is a switch device, this is voice control. Because so many people don't know about that. And it's okay to get into that. If your audience doesn't have that information, then great, let's give it to them. But also keeping in mind that, like, okay, we want to do this in a way that respects their time and is appropriate. So in that case, I really think that, like, leveraging that senior leadership is going to be really great, because if unless they're expecting you to do it, those messages coming from higher and higher in the org is very, very powerful, or should be anyway. So, I mean, I would love to have like that kind of situation where somebody in the room of that audience already knows about accessibility. So to me, that's the first question that I would ask is, like, okay, how do we get that person involved in this talk? Or how can they give the preamble to that? Maybe, you know, they start introducing and socializing that into that group ahead of time before I come in and pitch a big expensive program. You know, if you can have them introduce that, you know, a few weeks prior, let people's brains kind of churn on it, and then you show up with a solution to everyone's problems. Oh, what a great place to be. So those are my thoughts about how I would kind of try to do that. You know, maybe I'm trying to be a little bit too tricksy, but that might be a way to approach it. Good question. You've asked a very good question.
Yeah, we're getting a lot of great questions. I think we're on a roll here. Another one is, legal is an obvious ally, as you've stated, but what advice might you have for accessibility teams to secure legal buy-in when their legal partners don't yet see the risk? Beyond laws and lawsuits, any guidance on that you can share?
Oh, that's a good, I have apparently had the benefit of everywhere I've worked in my career has had a legal counsel that is like paying attention. So when I was at Veterans United, we had never had an accessibility complaint. Okay, but our legal counsel was aware that they were coming for us. Okay, because the home loan market is regulated by the CFPB. That is a place where you don't want to be. T-Mobile is regulated by the FCC, and both of these agencies from the government make it very easy for consumers to file a complaint. And so, like, if you're working in an industry where you're regulated by a government entity, yeah, go spend some time and learn what the requirements for that government entity are, and find out what other complaints have been out there. Because any legal counsel that's like, I don't think this is such a big deal, these are people, I don't want to say that they're not good legal counsel, but they're not paying attention. They're in that mindset of like, yeah, but maybe it won't hit us. Like, it's very easy to feel to become Chicken Little and say the sky is falling, but in their mind, I don't know, maybe the sky won't fall. What if it doesn't fall? So legal counsel is not as scary as you might think they are. They're just people. I really think that it's, if you can find some competitors who have been through a complaint, or peer organizations who have been through a complaint, or especially if you're regulated by a government body that makes it very easy to file a complaint, those are things you can bring to them and say, hey, do you think this is a risk? Like, because it sure was for our competitor, or it sure was for this company. That's kind of the way that I would have approached that. But I've never had to do that before with legal counsel. I've always worked with people who were like really twitchy about this space, and very interested in it. And they were also like genuinely nice, good people too, which helped. So I don't have a great answer for that, other than like, let's kind of do a little bit of their job for them, and bring some things before them that might be interested, because it sounds like they're not paying attention. Another very good question.
Okay, so sorry, I'm just trying to pick out. They're coming in fast and furious now.
Yeah.
So if we have buy-in from leadership and excitement around having a new person focused on accessibility, what are some strategies you recommend starting with? Where do I start to look for the priorities? And do I want to start talking about how I can help meet those priorities?
Yeah. Tell you what, let me, so like in that, it depends on, how much time you've got and what your relationship is with those leaders. But let me share my screen. We'll go back to that strategic goals and policy slide. Okay, so strategic goals are things that like really set the big picture direction for your team and for your enterprise. There are goals that they're going to be interested in at, various levels. So like senior leadership, doesn't necessarily need to know that you're going to formalize requirements for procurement. Okay. They don't necessarily need to know about, all the ins and outs of like an accessibility champions program or some other program you want to start. But they do need to know that, like, hey, we want to incorporate accessibility into mandatory training by role. Okay, that's a big change for the entire enterprise. You know, if you have a goal of reducing the number of remediation fire drills from 3 per quarter to 0, okay, that's a great ongoing goal. And that's you saying, hey, I'm going to work to solve this problem that you're hearing about. Naturally, if you're seeking funding for a technical resource group, that's a big thing that you want to talk with them about. You know, anything that's going to affect many, many people that requires parts of your enterprise that might be resistant to become suddenly very collaborative and happy to do it. Those are the things where leadership is really well placed for you. You know, if you're talking about, you know, achieving these policy targets across all of these different products in the digital space that you offer, you know, you're going to be talking to every single one of those products and their managers and having leadership say, this is important to me, and so it's important to you. That's the way that I kind of think of it is, okay, what are the things that this leader can do for each of these strategic goals? Anything outside of it where, you know, you have a strategic goal that isn't necessarily something that requires other people to buy in for, or you just have something that is you know, an objective or key result that is, you know, not necessarily something that leadership needs to buy in and have a lot of support for, or things that I'm probably not going to bring up to them. But anything where, like, hey, we have a strategic goal that all of our product teams are going to be committed to inclusive best practices, and we need help. We need your help to socialize this. We're going to need your help to impress upon them that this is important to you, and so it's important to them, because it's going to take some time from their busy schedules. And it may mean that they need to reprioritize some of their work a little bit, or reprioritize some other training that they're doing. Those kinds of things, you've got to have leadership buy-in on that. When we're talking about policy targets, you know, especially if you are talking to leadership for the first time, and especially if you're dealing with a complaint, you're going to need leadership buy-in on your targets for remediation. So how quickly do you want things fixed? You know, establishing a minimum deadline for remediation from when a defect is recorded is going to factor in, you know, okay, well, what sort of sprint cycles are we doing? Or if you're doing agile, maybe you're doing Kanban and you have like month-long sprint cycles, or you don't have sprint cycles, whatever it is, you're going to have to establish some sort of cyclical deadline for how things get fixed. That's one where your senior leadership are not going to be down in the weeds of like, well, why haven't they fixed this login button? But they do need to be at a space, operating and communicating at a level that says, this, something that's a blocking defect like this login button is something I expect to see fixed immediately. Like, this is a hot fix worthy issue and we want it out the door immediately. You can't sit on this for an entire quarter. That's kind of how I think of and approach what I'm asking for leadership in terms of like strategic goals and policy. It's like, what are the things where their input and ability to socialize comes into play?
We are at the hour, so I'm going to go ahead and conclude today's webinar.